The walls of the Kremlin are shaking, and Belarus is paying the price. What was once a loyal ally bound by promises of cheap fuel and protection is now choking on Moscow's desperation. Gas stations across Minsk, Grodno, and Brest stand empty. Lines of cars snake for miles, drivers sleeping in their vehicles or pushing them by hand, hoping for a few liters that never come. For the first time in decades, even those with cash cannot buy the fuel they need to live. And this is not a passing shortage. This is a collapse engineered by Russia itself. As sanctions and Ukrainian drone strikes cripple Moscow's oil network, the Kremlin has siphoned supplies away from Belarus to cover its own needs. The result is chaos on the streets and panic in the markets. A crisis not of war or disaster, but of betrayal. Belarus, the state that once seemed unshakable under Alexander Lukashenko's iron grip, is now trembling on the brink. The question is no longer whether the cracks are real, but whether Moscow's grip can hold when the people begin to realize their protector has become their betrayer. In Belarus, oil refineries are the lifeblood of the economy, and sadly, they have been struck at the source. The International Energy Agency warns that capacity has been crippled since Ukrainian drones destroyed pumping stations along the Druzhba pipeline in Russia's Bryansk region. NASA satellites even captured the fires from orbit, proof that the artery feeding Belarus's Moser and Naftan refineries had been severed. The fallout was immediate. Within days, official prices surged by more than 8%. And the government quietly admitted what ordinary citizens already knew. The flow of oil had stopped. Buses were pulled from their routes, factories shortened shifts, and farmers were forced to park their machinery mid-harvest. The fertile fields of the south were once Belarus's pride, and now hold crops left to rot in the soil. And the shortages ripple even further. With transport costs climbing, every delivery of bread, milk, and meat adds new strain. Shelves still hold goods, but fewer people can afford them. Inflation grows faster than wages, eating away at what little stability is left after years of sanctions. Then, Lukashenko appeared on state television promising calm, yet his words rang hollow. Independent outlets described fights breaking out in markets, black market fuel sold at double the official price, and a quiet realization spreading across society. Russia has begun buying from Belarusian refineries for itself, leaving its allies short. What was once sold as a partnership of strength is starting to look like exploitation. And if Moscow is willing to drain its closest ally in a time of crisis, the question becomes pressing. How long before the loyalty that bound Minsk to the Kremlin begins to fracture? The answer is already emerging. For decades, Minsk traded loyalty for security, cheap oil, discounted gas, and a Kremlin safety net. But now, that bargain is breaking down. Reports from Reuters and the Financial Times confirm that Russian companies have begun diverting Belarusian supplies back into Russia to cover Moscow's own shortages. What was once lifeblood for Belarus is being siphoned away, leaving ordinary people staring at empty pumps and wondering who the real enemy is. And the damage is spreading beyond gas stations. Belarus's own refineries, once pillars of industry, are now running at a fraction of capacity. The Naftan and Moser plants, which are essential for both domestic fuel and export revenue, have been forced to slow operations dramatically. And according to the IMF, that collapse in production has widened Belarus's trade deficit and cut into the state's already fragile budget. Even the government's fallback options are shrinking. Turkey and Kazakhstan, pressured by Western sanctions, have tightened trade channels, limiting Belarus's access to spare parts and re-exported goods. And each closed door leaves Minsk more isolated, more dependent on Moscow, and more resentful of the very ally that created the crisis in the first place. Belarus's reliance on Russia, once promised as a shield of stability, is now exposed as its deepest vulnerability. And that raises a far sharper question. If Moscow can no longer keep Belarus standing, does Minsk sink further into submission? Or does it finally risk breaking away? The answer is already taking shape. Betrayal doesn't just leave gas stations empty. It reshapes the entire country. Without affordable fuel, Belarus's transport networks have splintered. Buses in Minsk run on reduced schedules, trains face constant delays, and deliveries of food and medicine stall in depots. The World Bank has noted that transport costs are among the largest drivers of inflation in fragile economies. And Belarus is now a case study in how fast daily life can grind down. For families, that means not just waiting in line at the pump, but struggling to heat their homes or keep refrigerators stocked. For businesses, it means deciding whether to shut down completely or join the swelling black market, where gasoline is sold at 2 or 3 times the official price. Each choice corrodes trust in the state's ability to function, and with trust collapsing, a more dangerous question is spreading. If Moscow can no longer keep Belarus running, why should Belarusians keep letting Moscow rule their future? The answer is visible not just in shortages, but in how Belarusians are reacting. When the state can't provide fuel or stability, people stop trusting, and they start leaving. According to Poland's Office for Foreigners, more than 42,000 residence permits were granted to Belarusians in 2024 alone, a sharp rise that has only accelerated with the fuel crisis. Lithuania has reported similar surges, particularly among young professionals in healthcare and IT. This exodus is more than a search for survival. Western outlets like Euronews and The Guardian describe it as a silent revolution, a quiet vote of no confidence in Lukashenko's system and in Moscow's promises. Families are not carrying banners in Minsk squares anymore. They are carrying passports and boarding buses to Vilnius, Warsaw, and Riga for a regime built on loyalty and control. This is a deeper wound than protests. Protesters can be beaten back, but a generation that walks away, taking its skills, its money, and its future with it, cannot be forced to return. And that leaves a darker question hanging over Minsk and Moscow alike. What happens when an entire nation decides it has more of a future outside its borders than within? The answer is already evident inside Belarus itself. A state that loses its people also loses its strength. Independent watchdog group Vyazna has tracked a steady rise in detentions since the fuel crisis began, as Lukashenko leans harder on repression to compensate for his fading legitimacy. Yet harsher crackdowns cannot disguise the truth, that citizens are not rallying behind him. They are quietly leaving. Analysts at the Carnegie Endowment warn that this hollowing out creates a vacuum no amount of propaganda can fill. Industry shrinks, tax revenues fall, and the brightest minds such as doctors, engineers, and students are the first to go. And even though the state keeps tightening its grip, the grip is closing around less and less. For Moscow, the weakness of Belarus is more than a domestic concern. This country has been one of Russia's most important staging grounds, its railways and bases critical to the war effort. And if Lukashenko's regime falters, the Kremlin will be forced to decide whether to drain its already limited resources to save him, or risk losing its only real ally on NATO's doorstep. And for Belarusians themselves, the question runs deeper. When a regime can